Hello, it's Frazier, your favorite hearing specialist, and it's that time of week for the word of the day. Today I have the pleasure of discussing a word that I literally go over dozens of times every day, and it's the word audiogram. Audiogram. An audiogram has the results of an audiological evaluation. The audiological evaluation typically consists of a minimum of about 5 tests. If you go to an audiologist, they may conduct a few extra tests. Typically, a clinician is going to perform something called air conduction, which tests the entire auditory pathway. Secondly, we're going to test something called bone conduction, which is your inner ear or the third part of your ear directly by itself. Next, we want to test something called speech recognition thresholds, the softest that a person can understand speech. We also want to find what's called the word recognition scores. Okay, even if there is something going on with their hearing, how well do they understand with what residual hearing is left? And then also we want to find out something called the most comfortable listening level. We take those minimum tests or battery of tests and we put them on the chart called an audiogram. So if I had to title this lesson, today would be Audiograms 2020 Hearing. As we know, when we go to get our vision test, 2020 is considered optimal or ideal results to have. But what is optimal for hearing? That's what an audiogram is going to explain. The audiogram explains how we do an audiological evaluation, and it shows us how to quantify hearing. So to begin with, this is a version of an audiogram. Mine has something called familiar sounds to show where everyday sounds plot along this chart of hearing. Typically, the human range of audibility goes from 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz or cycles per second. However, on this typical audiogram, clinically we test from about 125 cycles or hertz, and typically we stop at around 8,000 hertz. Again, we do know that it goes out from 8 all the way to 20,000, but typically we stop at about 8,000. That's another reason, another lesson, another day why we stop at 8,000. And essentially, we're going to plot all of those minimum of 5 test results on this chart. When we test for thresholds, we're going to make sure that at each piano key or frequency, what level does a person hear at? We turn the beeps from negative 10 decibels as loud as 120 decibels, and we search for the threshold. And so for new clinicians to explain the results to a patient sometimes can be very daunting, and we want to make sure we go over everything thoroughly. And there's something called the ABCDs at the description of an audiogram. The first A stands for, is it asymmetrical or symmetrical results? Asymmetrical, one is different than the other. Symmetrical, the results or audiological findings are relatively about the same. The second step, or B, we want to know, are the results bilateral or unilateral, bi or one, both or one ear. The next thing we want to find out is the C. Is this considered a conductive hearing loss, a sensory neural hearing loss, or is it considered mixed? If it's a conductive hearing loss, typically I refer the patients. If it's a mixed hearing loss, typically I still refer the patients. Most of the patients that I fit with hearing aids have a sensory neural hearing loss, meaning that it's the nerve that has to break down in the auditory pathway to the brain. And lastly, the D in the ABCDs of the description of an audiogram is the degree of the loss. And this is where it becomes a little bit more important to the average everyday person or patient. The degree talks about the level in which they can hear. We quantify them as being mild, moderate, severe, or profound. The closer we are to that normal threshold, I said the normal threshold is 25 decibels and softer. The closer we are to this 25 line, the better our hearing results are. However, the further it deviates from the normal variation, the more severe or profound our hearing results are. So typically when we describe an audiogram, we're going to say the A, B, C, D. Asymmetrical or symmetrical, bilateral, unilateral. Is it conductive, sensory neural, or is it a mixed hearing loss? And lastly, we want to describe the degree of the hearing loss. Is it mild, moderate, severe, or profound? And lastly, I just wanted to show a few examples of variations in audiograms. If we look at this first audiogram here, we can see that the lower frequencies are relatively within normal limits, and they drop and they come back up. This is something that I would classify as a noise-induced hearing loss or a noise notch. Another variation in a hearing loss is considered a flat hearing loss, where all of the thresholds are relatively flat. Another example of an audiogram is a typical sensory neural hearing loss, where in the lower frequencies things are better and it just gradually goes down as the frequencies increase in cycles. Another hearing loss, this is something that is considered asymmetrical. They're not identical, although they mirror each other. They're not the same. It's an asymmetrical hearing loss. This is one that most people hope their results look like, and this is a hearing loss within normal limits. And as we can see, both of the results are relatively the same, so we would say that they are symmetrical. And then the last one I'd like to show is something a little bit different, which is similar to what we would classify as a cookie bite audiological results. So hopefully we've found the differences with what a normal hearing loss looks like, how do we quantify that, and what the A, B, C, Ds of audiological evaluation results mean. Have a great day.